Coming up, let's talk New York Giants on the road, going across to meet the Seattle Seahawks on the West Coast. What are the anticipations for injuries? Where do we think the key matchups lie? Do we have any belief in the Giants' ability to win a football game? We dive in next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. And Andy, let's talk about a little bit of injury news. The New York Football Giants obviously have been struggling inside of this category. We'll be waiting to get official word on whether or not these guys will play. But when you come into the list of did not participate, the old DNP, and you see Adoree Jackson, you see Dru Phillips, you see Devin Singletary dealing with the groin. You also have limited participation for Brian Burns, for Wan'Dale Robinson, and obviously the chief among them here is Malik Nabers, who went into the concussion protocol after suffering a concussion last week at the end of the game on that sideline catch. And the most alarming news was that Brian Daboll came out and said he's in the early stages of the concussion protocol. So it doesn't feel good or optimistic that Malik Nabers is trending towards playing on Sunday when it comes to this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, that's obviously the biggest concern for the Giants is whether Malik Nabers is going to play. It's not earth-shattering for us to say that, but the problem that we have on whether or not he's going to be available is exactly what you said. When Brian Daboll comes out and says early stages of the concussion protocol, and it's Wednesday, and they played on Thursday Night Football, that is not good. Like the combination of the timeline and him not at
Of
least
course.
passing some of the steps in the process. Remember, the NFLPA has a clear delineation of a five-step process that they follow, and you have to meet each benchmark to be able to move on. The fact that he's still in either phase one or phase two of the five-step process, he didn't actually specify which one it was. You just said early stages. It's not good. I mean, right now, if you had to handicap it, you would say that he's unlikely to play. Now,
Yeah.
we have seen a handful of players miraculously get through the protocol Friday into
Yeah.
Saturday to be able to play Sunday. But as a rule of thumb, if they're not at least like starting to get like exercise off to the side with their teams on Friday, it's unlikely that he plays. And obviously, he's the biggest name on the list. If the Giants don't have him, I mean, being shorthanded going on the road, West Coast, over to a team that has looked pretty formidable so far this season is a tall task for the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we said this last week when it was about Adoree Jackson and losses in the secondary, and obviously you want to see the rookie Dru Phillips out there and playing. But when we discussed that, I said, well, I'd rather it be taken away from a weak area of the team. And then, okay, yeah, we know that a weakness is getting weaker. Fine. Like it was already gonna be a problem. We'll talk about matchups. But when it comes to Malik Nabers, like this like, don't take away from one of the strengths. Don't take away the best player on this roster. And I don't think it's hard to really say that, barring if you want to get into the defensive side debate around things. But Malik Nabers has been absolutely electric. He's been the entirety of this offense. Daniel Jones, when he's been able to be successful, has been successful finding Malik Nabers and helping him move the chain. So if he's not going to be able to play, it's obviously going to dramatically change the way that this game looks and the way the game script looks. But it's also, just to your point, on a high level from the concussion perspective, it's like when it happened, you don't want to see it, but it happens on Thursday night, and it almost seemed like it was like a shock to Malik Nabers to have suffered it. It seemed to really be a different type of reaction that he was having to it. But then the problem is that was Thursday night, and they weren't playing again until the following Sunday. And in a lot
Right.
of ways, you were like, oh, no big deal. Not that concussions aren't a big deal, but typically you see guys go through the protocol, and it's a push to get there for the next week's game. But when you have 10 days, I think, at least for me, I looked at it as, oh, I'm sure he'll get in there. It didn't look severe. It wasn't a massive hit. He'll go ahead. He'll go through the process, and we'll hear that by middle of next week that he's fine and he's ready to go and he's saying all the right things. But even in that post game, you heard, I can't remember who it was. I think on the defensive side, might have been Bobby
Brian
Okereke,
Brian Burns
Brian
like
Burns.
shouted over like, "Are you okay?" And he was kind of like,
It was
"Ugh."
like, no, like I'm not all right. So you're like, okay. And so, yeah, all of that to say, it's obviously a massive concern from an on the field standpoint. But then the other part is the Giants are 1-3. It's not about throwing in the towel for the season, but there's no reason to be risking your number one wide receiver and having him go out there and play in a game against a defense that, while a lot has changed for them over the years, They're known to be a fast playing, physical defense that's a part of the Seahawks mentality. And you'd hate to put him at risk. And frankly, I'll put this back on Daniel Jones with a quarterback that it's not like we're talking about Patrick Mahomes here or one of the elites who would say, okay, maybe I got to try to make sure I protect this receiver when I'm putting that ball out there. Daniel Jones is having a hard time putting the ball where he wants to right now. And that would be inherently a bigger risk for a player like Nabers.
Well, and we talk about how important Neighbors is to Daniel Jones's progression, but to the overall offense, I won't say it's the same impact, but especially for this game, the Devin Singletary piece of this is a huge
Yeah, yeah,
concern
yeah.
for me, Adam. Like, I feel like we're underselling it because Malik Neighbors is so electric. You know, he's second in the league in yards. Devin Singletary not participating with a groin injury. If he doesn't play, that is a huge, huge situation for the Giants for us to monitor for two reasons. One, there's not really a proven person or veteran
Yeah,
behind Devin Singletary that who can just immediately jump in and take those snaps that you are confident can run the offense. And
yep,
while Devin Singletary looked slow in the last game and only averaged 1 point something yards per carry, at least he understands the system. He knows what he needs to do, and it's a one game potential aberration. It's only Eric Gray and it's only Tyron Tracy Jr. And in their limited snaps so far, it hasn't looked great. And the biggest problem for that, Adam, which is the second piece of it, is if you are going to attack this Seahawks defense, their weakness is not through the air in their secondary, but on their defensive line and giving up yards, albeit middle of the road in the league in
sure.
the rushing game. And so if the Giants don't have a guy out there that you feel confident can take the ball 20 times and relieve pressure off of Daniel Jones, that is just a red flag. No running game, no Malik Neighbors. Tell me how you feel. The question I have for you is: we didn't mention Dru Phillips yet. Is it a
Yeah.
bigger impact for the Giants than I have Dru Phillips or Devin Singletary in this one?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to flip it over to the Seattle injury list right now too. I would say right now, I'd probably say it's a bigger concern not having Dru Phillips, and it's not to take away what Singletary represents, because my concern with Singletary potentially being out is how are you making sure that you're protecting Daniel Jones when you're having the backfield on passing plays. Now we've seen Tyrone Tracy Jr. seem to be pretty good in picking up blitz packages. Eric Gray just isn't getting used enough to feel like that's the one-to-one replacement that they would go with, although he's the north and south runner. So I wonder how they look at that. Will they keep a tight end in? Will we start talking about the fullback slash tight end, right? What will Dable adjust on that side? There's no adjusting on the defensive side for not having Dru Phillips out there. They don't have another player. Nick McLeod, and he's coming back from his injuries week over week. You've got Cordell Flott. He's played on the outside, flashed a couple of nice plays, but overall has struggled. We know the mess that it is. So if I can get Andrew Phillips back out there, who has looked good when he's been out there, then I start to think about, well, I don't care really, what the matchup's going to be. Maybe it's the veteran Tyler Lockett, right? Okay, he's 32. You can definitely stick with him, play physical. Is it Smith and Jigba when you match up there? Even if they want to move DK Metcalf around the lineup anywhere inside the formation, I just like having a player who so far in his very, very young career, after now missing potentially 2 straight games, has looked good. So I actually will say, I know I talk about, weak unit getting weaker, but because of the sample size we got on him and because of the weapons we'll talk about with Seattle, I think it probably is a bigger concern in that regard, mostly because this is such a bad way to put it. The offense has already shown me that they struggle no matter what they got going on. So, like, what's the difference here? And Singletary struggled in the last couple of games. And if you're not going to have Neighbors, I mean, it's going to be a mess probably offensively, but defensively, I could see this just kind of falling apart if you don't have health over there on that side of the ball.
Yeah, the one last note, because I know you want to talk about Seattle, is Dru Phillips also is so good in the run game. We obviously the Giants are going
Physical
to
player,
focus on
yeah.
Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. They are a very good rushing attack, and his physicality of getting into the line, making tackles for loss, making them one dimensional, is something that the Giants have needed. It's been noted around the league how great Dru Phillips has looked. His
Yep.
impact cannot be understated. So I think you're spot on with that. Where like running backs are a little bit more replaceable unless you have a top 3 or 4 running back in the league. But man, the Giants hope that we're going to have some of these guys out there, because if this list of who's not participating in it continues to stay where it is, the Giants are going to be very shorthanded against a very, very good opponent.
Now, on the other side of it, just briefly here, we'll let you know that there were DNPs on Wednesday for the Seattle Seahawks as well. That was Byron Murphy. He did not play with a hamstring. You had Dotson, who didn't play with an ankle and shoulder injury. Hankins didn't play, former Giant, for personal reasons, didn't participate. And then you had Mafe, who with a knee was out as well. So you're talking about 2 linebackers and a defensive tackle, personal on Hankins, so you can't count him out. That is right inside the meat of it. So maybe the Giants are or are not going to have Devin Singletary, but there could be some options there. And at a minimum, maybe it goes ahead and makes it a different version of the Seattle defensive front that allows the offensive line to be a little bit more stable. They have a laundry list, by the way, of limited participants here, from tight ends. I'm not even going to go through the whole list, but both their all 3 of their tight ends were limited participants. You have Tyler Lockett with a thigh. You have additional linebackers in this room as well. So it's not the walking wounded by any stretch, because limited, midweek can mean fine by Thursday, Friday, and they're not the type of injuries, unlike for the Giants, that maybe feel a little bit more, trending in the wrong direction as opposed to the right. Groin injury for Singletary or concussion for Malik Nabers. Those are not things that you just, quote unquote, bounce back from midweek.
Keep in mind, Adam, the Seahawks played on Monday Night Football. And so their Wednesday practice is actually just a walkthrough. Yeah. And it's like the anticipation of what they would have done in practice. So, that you can be a little bit more coy on Wednesday on who's participating and who's not. But to your point, just to highlight things, we talk about the Giant injuries. 6 of the 11 starters on defense for Seattle have question marks coming into this game. That is a ton of talent coming from Leonard Williams, was someone that has been dinged up, may not play. Boye Mafe, a guy that you liked coming out of college, may not play. Jerome Baker, their outside linebacker. Nwosu got injured. He doesn't know if he's going to be on the field. Their defensive line is very, very good. Their defensive line isn't very good if the entire starting defensive line is out for this game. So it does feel like the theme during this week is who's going to be healthier going into this game, knowing that both teams have at least 5 to 7 key injuries that they need to be able to sort out by Sunday.